Hello folks, welcome to the Edupedia world and I am Abhinay Gupta. Today again we'll continue with the topic, the SARFAESI Act 2002, which is the Securitization and Reconstruction of Financial Assets and Enforcement of Security Interest Act 2002. So we'll take just 2 minutes to cover up the brief of what we have done so far. We have seen the entire flow, the four basic components, the obligor, bank, securitization, reconstruction company and the QIB. We have understood the basic definitions of various terminologies, which is important from your exam point of view. You need to explain them, right? You have direct questions in your examinations. We have seen definitions like securitization, reconstruction, non-performing assets, financial asset, security receipt, scheme, and so on, right? Originator, obligor. Then we have seen the various sections, starting from section 3, which talked about the registration of the securitization company, the issue of certificate of registration, followed by section 4, where we talked about the cancellation of the same certificate of registration. What are the conditions and what are the procedures for cancellation, right? Then we have seen section 5, which talked about the acquisition of the rights or interest in the financial asset by the securitization company, right? And then we have seen in section 6 that the bank has to send a notice to the obligor, other person and the registering authority, specifying that the asset has been taken away by the securitization and reconstruction company and that they'll have to make the payment to the SR company instead of the bank. Then we have seen section 7, where we talked about where we saw the process. The bank gives the financial asset to the securitization company. They give the security receipt to the QIB. In exchange, they get the fund and keep it in a separate bank account. And in case they are not able to reconstruct the financial asset, more than 75% of the QIB will call a meeting, and whatever they decide will be binding on the securitization and reconstruction company, right? And then we have seen section 8, where we talked about the exemption from the registration of the security receipt, and section 9 talked about the measures for asset reconstruction. We have seen the various 5-6 measures how a securitization company can reconstruct the asset, the financial asset that they have taken, right? And now we'll move ahead to the next section, which is section 13. The enforcement of security interest, right? This is a very important section. It has already been asked in your November 2011 examinations also, and you need to understand each of the step and procedure in detail, right? To know actually what happens. We have seen, okay, it has been taken over and it goes this way and that way, but how the reconstruction takes place, how do they actually get the money out from the obligor? That process is covered under section 13. So this will actually be a very interesting topic for you. Listen very carefully and try to grab what is being taught, right? Try to understand the flow. Try to visualize what is happening in the real life. Okay. So the first and foremost thing that we need to keep in mind when we start the section is that there is no intervention of the court. When the securitization and reconstruction company goes ahead to reconstruct a financial asset, the court will not intervene, right? They don't have any action to play in between, right? But that is only when the securitization and reconstruction company goes by the law, right? When the directors are well equipped and well informed about the securitization and reconstruction procedures and they follow the same. Now, try to understand this plot, right? There is an obligor who goes to the bank and takes the loan, and in return it gives them the secured asset, right? And the obligor himself is a secured asset for the bank because it is the debtor for the bank, right? And now when we take a loan, when the obligor takes a loan, they have a duty to repay the principal and interest at fixed installment, that is pre-decided at the time of taking the loan, right? So far as they are repaying their debts and installments, right, they are considered to be performing asset. Okay, within due period they are able to repay the principal amount that has been decided along with the interest component in it, right? But what happens when they stop making the payment, right? When the bank stops receiving the principal or the interest amount, right? Then as per the various sections, various law, they are considered to be non-performing asset after a certain point, after the certain limit is crossed, right? So when they become a non-performing asset, right, like when they become a substandard, loss asset, right, or doubtful asset, then that is the time where the bank will send them a notice that okay, you have become a non-performing asset. This were your due date according to which you were supposed to make so much of payment, right? So this is your secured asset. The entire detail of asset will be given in the notice along with the payment that is due, right? The amount which is payable, that will be given in the notice, and that notice will be sent by the bank to the borrower. And then the borrower will be under an obligation to discharge the liability within the period of next 60 days, right? That is the time limit given under this act. That okay, if you have become a non-performing asset, the bank will send you a notice, and then please discharge your liabilities within the period of next 60 days, right? Otherwise also the borrower has an option, right, to make a representation. Okay, I will not be able to make this, but this is the situation and this is when I will do it. And whatever be the representation that the borrower wants to make. Now if that representation is acceptable to the bank, it is well and good, no issue. They will continue the situation as it is, right, or as per the representation they will modify it. But if the bank disagrees, if the bank does not accept the representation, then the bank will have to re-communicate the same matter to the obligor, to the borrower, right, and that will be done within a period of 1 week from the receipt of the representation, right? And if the bank blindly rejects the representation, then the borrower has an option to approach the debt recovery tribunal, right? It will appeal to the debt recovery tribunal that okay, I had made a representation, I'm ready to pay the amount, but this is a little difficulty that I'm facing, so I made a representation to the bank for a little leniency, but the bank straightforward rejected it, right? That is what it can appeal to the debt recovery tribunal and again get a stay order, right, or get a support from the debt recovery tribunal, right, in this case. But if the bank gives them a valid reason, okay, this is why I reject your representation, this is not a very favorable option for us and we will be bound to reject your representation, and this is the conditions and these are the criteria that we have evaluated your representation with, right, and it is formally communicated to the borrower. If this is done by the bank, if the bank is following all the procedures and time and doing all the things accordingly, then the borrower will not be able to approach the debt recovery tribunal, because that has been very lawfully rejected. The representation has lawfully been rejected within the time period and with the reasons and the evaluation, right? So this is the procedure, if you can see on the screen, right? The secured creditor giving notice to the borrower needs to discharge in 60 days, and if not, they can make a representation. That is another option, right? And then we can also see that once the borrower receives a notice from the bank, then the borrower will not be able to sell, lease or transfer the secured asset. The asset that they have secured with the bank, they will not be able to sell it, right? Because if the borrower thinks, okay, I have to pay 1 CR, my asset is worth 1.10, I'll sell the asset and I'll pay 1 CR. No, now you cannot do that, right? You should have done that earlier if you could, right? But now when you have the notice to repay the amount, you will not be able to do that because now that asset vests with the bank, right? So this is the basic crux, the basic structure of how it goes ahead, right? Now, what happens if the borrower is not able to discharge the liability in 60 days? Once the representation is cancelled, we have already seen that, right? So if the representation is cancelled, they will have to discharge the liability in 60 days. Now what happens if they are not able to do it? If they are not able to do it, that means if the borrower defaults, right, the period of 60 days, then there are certain measures available with the bank. First is they can take the possession of the asset, right? They'll take possession of the secured asset of the borrower, and then along with it they will also have the right to transfer by way of any lease or assignment or sale, right, for the purpose of realizing the amount, right? So they can take the asset and sell, lease or dispose it off to get the amount recovered from that, right? Second thing is that they can take over the management of the borrower, right? They will not take that particular secured asset, but they will take over the management of the business of the borrower, and once they have the management in their hand, right, they will also have the right to transfer by way of any lease, assignment or sale any of the assets of the borrower in order to realize their secured asset, to realize their loan amount or realize their lending, right? Then they also have an option to appoint a manager for the secured asset. So if you remember, while we were discussing section 10 what are the other functions of securitization company, there we had seen that they can also be appointed as a manager. So this is where the securitization company appoints a manager for the secured asset, and that can be another securitization company who can be appointed as a manager. Right? They will manage the secured asset. Now they will enter the management of the business of the borrower. They will not be taken over. But now as a person, his responsibility would be to take care of the secured asset. Now that manager will decide as to what is to be the next dealing with the secured asset. Whether they need to dispose it off, whether they need to carry it forward, whether they need to use it to gain some money or something, and that will be done by the manager. Right? And because that asset will have to be managed, they have to have somebody to manage it when they take it over. Right? Because the secured creditor have already taken over that asset. They are taking the possession of that asset. Right? Now, there is a situation if the secured asset has already been given to somebody else. Right? If there is a third person who has taken the secured asset and now there is some money due from that person, then they can send a notice to the acquirer of the secured asset. The bank will send them a notice mentioning that now they will have to make the payment to the bank instead of the borrower. Right? So if, for example, Mr. A was the obligor and we have a B Limited bank, B Banking Limited, and then there is Mr. C who has taken the asset already from Mr. A, right? And Mr. C had to pay, for example, rupees 1 CR to Mr. A, and that is the amount of loan taken by Mr. A. So now bank can send a notice to Mr. C directly, right? Wanting Mr. C to pay that due to bank directly instead of going and paying it to Mr. A. Now that is the right with the securitization company. Right? So net these are the various measures: taking over the possession of the asset and selling or leasing it off, taking over the management and then selling and leasing the asset off, or taking over the asset and hiring a manager or appointing a manager to take care of the asset, or if it has been given already to somebody else, then asking him to please pay the money directly to the secured creditor instead of the borrower. Right? And over here, if that third person, Mr. C, that we were talking about, when they make a payment to the bank to the secured creditor directly, they will be considered to be discharged of their liability of paying to Mr. A. Right? That is again a provision of this section. Right? Now, what happens is when the secured creditor takes the possession of the asset and they decide to sell it off, right? They will just not go to one person and say, okay, yeah man, please keep this asset and give me the money. No, that will not take place. What will actually happen in a practical scenario is that asset will be now auctioned, right? And in that auction, various person will be invited and they will raise their bidding. And as you know, while raising any bid, you always have a base price. The bank will quote the base amount. Okay, this is the minimum that we demand for this asset. Now you can raise your bid and whoever gives the highest bid will get the asset. Right? So for example, if there is first attempt and bank appoints the base amount, okay, this will be the lowest bid and nobody bids above that. So ultimately the auction goes for a toss. So in that situation, what happens is the bank may again appoint an officer, the secured creditor may appoint an officer. So in the subsequent bid, the officer will now bid above the base price on behalf of the secured creditor himself. Like if I'm the person auctioning an asset, I will appoint my friend to please go and sit in the audience and bid a price higher than the base price so that I am able to sell the asset, because that is the requirement. Right? Although I am not getting the money, but now I am getting the real position of the asset as a purchaser of the asset. Now I am not the acquirer from the borrower, I am the purchaser of the asset now. Right? Because I have attended the bid and I have made the payment and I have taken the asset. So the bank has received the payment. Now what happens is now if, for example, the secured creditor had lent 1 crore rupees, right? And the bid amount, the base flooring that they had settled at is 50 lakhs. And their own representative, the officer, takes away the asset for 60 lakhs. So now, although there is no transaction in money, the asset goes and comes back to the secured creditor, but the borrower is relieved of that 60 lakh of liability. That will be considered as if the borrower has paid rupees 60 lakh. The 60 lakh is recovered. Now the liability that exists with the borrower is for the remaining 40 lakh only. right? So that is what they achieve with the bidding transaction, right? But keep in mind that will only take place when the bid goes for a toss. That will only take place in the subsequent bid. The officer will be allowed to attend the bid when the bank is making a subsequent auction, right? So if we can see on the screen, the secured creditor can bid for the immovable property, right? And that purchase price would be reduced from the claim, right? So that is one case where the bank auctions and takes the asset back, right? Now if there is somebody else who bids and takes away the asset in the first auction itself, right? So in that case, what will happen is that that person who takes away the secured asset by making the payment as per the bid, as per the auction, so in that case the transferee has all the rights as if the owner, that is the borrower, has transferred the asset to the bidder, to the purchaser, to the third party, right? So in this case it will not be considered as if the bank has given it to them and it is a middleman who is giving. So what will be the ownership of the asset? So as per this section, as per the act, if the bank auctions the asset and sells it off, then the owner, the third party who has purchased the asset, will that transferee will have all the rights as if the owner has himself transferred the asset to that person, right? And one more thing, where we have seen in the previous case that the asset is taken over by the bank himself, the bank purchases the asset. Over there, if you remember the Banking Regulation Act that we have studied, section 9, right? That section 9, that the bank has to dispose of the asset within the period of 7 years and the other extension of 5 years, that will still be applicable on this asset too, right? Because this is also a non-banking asset for the bank. So even though they purchase it today, they will have to dispose it off within a period of next 7 years. Or if they get an extension from RBI, as the case may be, within next 13 years, right? So now there's one more thing, that all the expenses that has been incurred above in taking the possession, auctioning it, transferring it and stuff, that will be borne by the borrower, right? Because the borrower has made the default, because of whom this entire procedure has to be conducted now. Otherwise, if he was making the payment on time, we wouldn't have entered into such a complex procedure, right? We wouldn't have invested our time and energy and money behind it. So if that has been invested, it is the liability of the borrower to repay it to the bank, right? And there's one more thing, that these conditions, all these procedures that we are talking about, will take place only if the borrower is not able to discharge the liability within this period of 60 days, right? But if all the dues and expenditures of the secured creditors are paid by the borrower within 60 days, the asset will not be sold, right? That is another provision of this act, that they are not allowed to sell the asset now. Now, the financing. This is the plain situation that we have seen from the point of view of a bank. Now consider a situation where the bank is not the only financer. For the same secured asset, like maybe it's a very big asset, it's a mansion for that person, and he has taken loan from 3-4 different financiers, right? Financing a part of it, but the mansion cannot be broken down into pieces. So if it is a situation of joint financing, then what happens is that greater than 60% of the financiers will have to take a combined decision, and whatever decision they take, if they have a 60% majority supporting that decision, then it will be a binding decision on the rest 40%, right? And now suppose, like in the example that we had seen, they have recovered 60 lakh rupees, but still 40 lakh is yet to be recovered. So for this, they can the secured creditor can they can file an appeal with the debt recovery tribunal to help them to get this debt out from the borrower, to recover this debt, right? And the secured creditor has the right to proceed against the guarantor also. Like if Mr. A had come to take the loan, he has given an asset, and I also wanted a guarantor, because if he is not able to pay, there should be somebody else who should pay. So in the situation, if Mr. A is not paying, the secured creditor is allowed to proceed against the guarantor too, right? So that is all about section 13, the enforcement of security interest, and I guess it is clear with you people as to what is the entire procedure. Till it is a performing asset, we have no big deal. When it becomes unperforming, the bank will send a notice. They'll have to discharge it within 60 days or make a representation. If bank accepts the representation, well and good. If bank rejects the representation, that has to be well communicated, right? And then the bank can go ahead with various measures of recovering the debt, taking over the asset, taking over the management, appointing a manager and stuff that we have seen, right? And then it can also auction and bid and repurchase by itself, or can sell it off to some other person. We have seen what rights and liabilities that the other person, the purchaser of the asset, will have, right? And then we have seen what will happen in the case of joint financing also, and that the secured creditor can proceed against the guarantor too, right? And if there is some debt which is still not recovered, then the secured creditor has the option to appeal to the debt recovery tribunal for recovery of the same, right? So that is all about the Security Interest Act. The Enforcement of Security Interest, Section 13. So that will be all for the lecture today. We'll continue with Section 15 onwards in the next lecture. So until then, this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. Thank you. Bye-bye.